Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission to order. It's 9:04 a.m. on Saturday morning, February 26th. I'm Commissioner Connie Galambos-Malloy. I will be your chair for this meeting, along with Vice Chair Commissioner Jody Filkins-Weber, who's to my left. At this time, I'd like to do roll call, please.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Here.
Commissioner Anchetta?
Here.
Commissioner Baraba? Here. Commissioner Blanco?
Here.
Commissioner Dye?
Here.
Commissioner DiGiulio? Here. Commissioner Filkins-Weber? Here. Commissioner Forbes? Here. Commissioner Galambos-Malloy?
Here.
Commissioner Antai? Commissioner Parvenu?
Here.
Commissioner Raya? Commissioner
Here.
Commissioner Ward?
Here.
Commissioner Yao? We have a quorum.
Thank you. Well, we're very excited about today's proceedings, and we'd like to extend a big thanks both to the presenters that are already here in the audience, those who are on their way, and the public who's watching on the live stream. We know that many of you have put travel time and have been so gracious to accommodate our requests in terms of how to format your information that you'll be sharing with us here today. So we thank you very much for that and value your time highly. We wanted to reiterate what the purpose of today's meeting is, as it was posted on the agenda. The purpose is to provide us as commissioners with a background on what type of education and outreach has been undertaken on the part of citizen-based groups across the state, both preceding this point in time and also what's on the horizon for the spring and the summer as we really get into the heart of drawing the lines for the state of California. As you know from the posted agenda, this is not a hearing designed to collect formal community of interest testimony. We are in the process of scheduling our formal input hearings for that. They'll be occurring all across the state, so we would invite you to save that type of testimony for those meetings. However, if that type of testimony does come up, we will be sure to integrate that once we have our technical team in place who will be able to help us work on that. We did ask our partners at the Center for Collaborative Policy at Cal State Sacramento to join us in helping plan and facilitate this event. We had a process whereby interested groups could pre-register and allot a certain period of time and even arrange to do a formal PowerPoint presentation to the Commission. So I'll be having CCP facilitate that specific part of the agenda so we as commissioners can really just sit back and absorb and have the opportunity to ask questions and clarifications. I did want to let the public know that the presentations that will be given to us today, some of them are already available online at the redistrictingcalifornia.org website. And Mr. Wilcox, is it Redistricting CA or redistrictingca.org? Some are already online, and the ones that are not online will be there shortly. As you know, we've been facing quite a few technical challenges, so we're very grateful to the collaborative for offering us such great assistance on this front. At the close of the time when we do all the group presentations, which at this point is looking like mid-afternoon, we will be opening it up to general public comment following our normal protocol. So depending on the level of public participation that we have, the comment period will be sometime between 3 and 5 minutes, and we'll make that assessment at the time where we transition into public comment. Our goal is that we will be finishing this meeting today. We don't anticipate the need to go into tomorrow. However, we are here to listen to whatever public comment is provided to us, however long that takes. What I would like to actually do at this time, before I hand it over to CCP, is to offer an opportunity for any commissioners who have relationships with any of the organizations that have registered to make presentations to be able to disclose that at this time as per our policy that we have recently passed. I will start and model and say that I do have a relationship with the Greenlining Institute, I work at a nonprofit organization, Urban Habitat. Greenlining Institute has also been around a long time in the Bay Area. We're not actively working on any projects or programs with them, but do know them kind of socially and generally in the same, working in the same field. Beyond that, I do not have any personal relationships with the other organizations listed, although the Irvine Foundation, which has funded many of these groups, do have a relationship organizationally with the Irvine Foundation. Are there any other commissioners who would like to chime in? Commissioner Anchetta.
Mr. Eugene Lee, who's coming in at 10. I was employed by the Asian Pacific American Legal Center from 91 to 93. I was on the board of what is now known as the Asian American Center for Advancing Justice from 94 to 98. And I have, prior to my being a commissioner, I have spoken to Mr. Lee about the Voting Rights Act, in particular the language assistance provision, which is an area by scholarship, and he works in that area. I think I have talked to David Lee before, but it's been many years. And I may know somebody else, but I hate to admit that I can't recall by name anybody else. I will certainly chime in if I suddenly realize by looking at their faces that I do know them, but off the list, I don't think I know anybody else.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Blanco.
Yes, I've worked with the Greenlining Institute. I don't think I know Michelle, but I've worked with the Greenlining Institute. I know Mr. Ochoa. And, of course, I worked at MALDEF, and Mr. Ochoa was the technical person for the redistricting in 2000. I know Mr. Lee, and I've worked with APOC. I know Ms. Trudy Schaefer and have been at meetings with the League of Women Voters and received an award from the League of Women Voters. I know Astrid Garcia and I know Naleo and have worked with them. Erica Teasley was co-counsel with me on a case when she was at NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Bonnie Glazer I know from her work at Berkeley. And David Lee I've known for many years from San Francisco and working with KVOC.
Thank you. Can I just take pause to request that all commissioners and staff remove their cell phones from any areas near the microphones? We're getting a lot of feedback. Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, in reference to the 1 o'clock, the agenda at 1 o'clock with Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, I've done some organizing work with, or collaborated on organizing on a few projects. Chris Lanier is somebody that I work with the Census 2010, but other than that, they're a great organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Blanco.
I forgot to mention that I've also worked with the Advancement Project on an election lawsuit.
Thank you. Seeing no further disclosures, we will be hearing more about the formal format for the day, but what will basically happen is each organization will have an opportunity to do their formal presentation, and then I will facilitate a question and answer, brief 5-minute question and answer period for the commissioners, and then we'll pass it back and forth between CCP and myself as chair. So with that, I would like to invite Sarah and Charlotte from the Center for Collaborative Policy to please come introduce yourselves and take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sarah Rubin, and I'm with the Center for Collaborative Policy. We're part of California State University, Sacramento. I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Chorneau.
Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to see you. Just a couple of things. So what's going to be happening is we're going to be having presentations up to 15 minutes each, and then there's going to be 5 minutes for Q&A, which is pretty limited, but to stay on time, we are looking to keep it short today. And for our presenters, we're so glad you are here, but we just want to kindly and respectfully let you know that when it gets to 15 minutes, we're going to be cutting you off so that we can stay on time. What's going to be happening is if you brought your presentation on a flash drive, if you want to, before you come up or on breaks, if you want to give it to Charlotte, she will load it onto the laptop, and then that way we can have you run through your PowerPoint as you present to the commissioners. I want to apologize ahead of time to those here in the audience and anybody watching on the live stream. Unfortunately, with this room, we do not have the ability for you to see the screen, to see the PowerPoint presentation as the presenter is referring to a given slide. But as the commissioner already explained, a number of these are on the website, and then the presentations that are done today will also be put up on the CRC website at the beginning of next week. So let me apologize ahead of time for that. If you haven't been here before, out the doors that would be to your right, if you're in the audience, down the hall and to the right are the restrooms. If anybody doesn't know where the restrooms are. And if in general you have any questions having to do with presenting, if you want to see Charlotte today, that would be great. I'm wondering if before we jump in, if anybody has any questions of clarification about what's about to happen. No? Okay, great. So I'm going to just, for those of you who, the agenda is on the web, but for those of you maybe who are, it's not possible for you to get it, I'm just going to read the names of the groups that are going to present today so everyone is clear. And I'm not going to say the names of the presenters, just the groups. We've got the Greenlining Institute, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, the League of Women Voters of California, NALEO, the African American Redistricting Collaborative, the Redistricting Group at Berkeley Law, the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, the Contra Costa County Republican Party Central Committee, the Vote Integrity Subcommittee, Sacramento Cultural Hub Media Foundation, the Contra Costa Redistricting Task Force, the Advancement Project, the Sacramento Area Black Caucus, California Conservation Voters, and the Chinese American Voters Education Committee. Okay, so Michelle, if you want to go ahead and come up.
Good morning. So it's great to see you all in person. This is the first time I'm attending a commission meeting in person, but I have been watching a live from the live stream feed. Thank you for allowing us this chance to present. I think the idea of an outreach session to collect input on what efforts have already begun is a great idea. And so my name is Michelle Romero. I'm the Redistricting Fellow at the Greenlining Institute, and let's go ahead and get started.
Michelle, if you don't mind letting me interrupt you briefly, there's been a request from the commissioners if we could reorient the presenters so that they're facing us. So I don't know, maybe you can sit on that other part of the L table. Because right now we've got your back facing half of the commission, unfortunately. That was an oversight on our part. Thank you for your flexibility.
Okay.
Oh, no, not at all. We'll take that out of our minutes.
Alrighty, is this better? So who we are. The Greenlining Institute is a national multi-ethnic public policy, research, and advocacy organization that works on behalf of low-income communities and communities of color. Our headquarters is in Berkeley, California, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our organizational mission is to empower communities of color and other disadvantaged groups through multi-ethnic, economic, and leadership development, civil rights, and anti-redlining activities. So that said, you should know we have a variety of programs that we run, everything from community reinvestment, consumer protection, green assets, health, and Claiming Our Democracy is one of those programs where our redistricting program lies. So our redistricting project specifically seeks to empower communities of color by making redistricting accessible to them, providing educational and training opportunities to community members, and facilitating multi-ethnic community dialogues to help prepare commissioners to testify before the commission. We are one of those organizations that is funded by the James Irvine Foundation and a member of the Redistricting California Alliance, which I believe you all are now familiar with. So some of the redistricting activities that Green Lining has participated in the past, between 2009 and 2010, we were a partner with the Bureau of State Audit's office to help recruit candidates to apply for the commission, and we also monitored the selection process. Throughout the process, we've advocated for a diverse commission, a transparent process, accessibility of information, and compliance with the Voting Rights Act. This has occurred through letters to the Bureau of State Audit's office, letters to the commission, as you all have received, and so forth. So what are we doing now? Since the commission has been seated, we have enrolled a class of 10 community redistricting leaders across the state. This really is in line with Green Lining's mission to develop leaders who can address the critical issues facing our nation, and we believe that redistricting was one of those topics that we really needed to have a train-the-trainers type of program to leave leaders behind in the communities to help carry forth the efforts. So it's a leadership development program. We provide intensive training on redistricting. These leaders attend events such as the Redistricting California statewide conference that occurred this past January, and other events where they can network with other organizations outside of Green Lining who are also doing some work on redistricting. They act as local liaisons and community point people for their communities, and this kind of works two ways. They provide input and feedback to their communities. They provide some trainings and help us facilitate the outreach process, but then they also let us know what's going on the local level and how we can best support efforts that are already going on. So again, they help to outreach, organize, and mobilize their communities to participate in some of our trainings and events. Beyond the leadership program, we do have strong partnerships with community organizations across the state. So the Green Lining Institute leads a statewide coalition, the Green Lining Coalition, which is a coalition of various nonprofit and community groups across the state working in a variety of different topics. There are about 40 coalition members, and so we work with some of our partners who we have relationships with, and then we've also worked to develop new partnerships with local organizations, specifically around redistricting. So these engage with various sectors in the nonprofit, small business, community, and faith communities. It is a multi-ethnic effort, so we make proactive efforts to engage the Latino, Asian, and African American communities in particular, but we are open to the broader community. Partner organizations participate in a number of different ways. So they can host community events at their facility for their members. They forward information from our institute to their listservs and networks, again, to ensure that their members are represented at these events. And they can co-sponsor events by providing their logo and additional support to advertise and provide a level of credibility within that community about the work that we're doing. Green Lining also has partnerships with local and ethnic media across the state. We've produced a series of op-eds. We've been quoted as an expert in various redistricting articles. We've had guest appearances on radio shows. Recently, we taped a Headline News local edition segment, which will be airing soon. And again, all of these really is, all of our efforts are really with one primary purpose in mind, and that's to encourage the public to participate in this process. Green Lining hosted a successful media briefing in LA before the statewide conference, and so that's a model that we're looking to replicate in the coming months. And the goal of that was to kind of brief ethnic and local media about redistricting. So some of our ethnic press outlets don't have the same staff resources to have someone assigned to redistricting full-time or assigned to particular political issues. So we wanted to make sure that they knew things like the difference between reapportionment and redistricting, some things that the press get wrong. And so that proved to be very successful. And we're hosting a similar roundtable discussion in Spanish language for our radio broadcast next week. So our target regions, you'll see listed here, the greater Sacramento area, although we are focusing particularly in the Elk Grove area, the San Francisco Bay area, with a focus on San Mateo, San Francisco, and Alameda counties. Fresno, which we're including now, Stockton and Modesto, because there's been some interest there from the community, and so they've asked us to come there and provide a series of trainings. We are in Bakersfield, the Inland Empire, which we're defining as San Bernardino and Riverside counties, Los Angeles County, and San Diego. At this point, I wanted to just direct you to the folders that you all received earlier this afternoon. So there is a packet of greenlining information there, and you'll have a list of the regions in there as well, with more detail about some of the partner organizations that we're working with and the particular counties or communities that we're in each of these regions. So what type of support do we provide? We provide general information about redistricting, what it is and why it's important. We will be hosting a series of community of interest workshops to let community members go through a process of identifying what is a community of interest, what does it mean for redistricting, and what does this mean for my community. So you'll see in the packet as well some materials or worksheets about how to identify communities of interest in your community. And those are some materials that Chris Lanier from CAUSE and I had put together for a presentation that we co-facilitated in January. We will be providing basic mapping training, and I'll be clear here, this has to do with accessing Google Earth, Healthy City, and other free training programs that are more accessible to the greater public. And we're using these mapping trainings as a tool for advocacy and empowerment, not for drawing official redistricting maps that they would present as a technical alternative map. The way we see this happening is, folks would be able to kind of zoom into their address location, right, and get a ground view of their community. So what libraries do they use? What resources did they use? What are their community assets? And kind of just draw a polygon around what they see as their community as we're discussing communities of interest. And that would be something that they can tangibly take away when the commission later presents a map proposal of where the district lines will be drawn, so that they can easily identify, does that map look like it divides my community, or does it keep it together? We provide assistance locating appropriate data sources to support community of interest testimony. We'll be hosting preparing to testify workshops, so we can do mock presentations so that folks can get familiar with the setting that you'll be requiring. And we provide toolkit items. So in your packets is a redistricting video that we recently produced. All of our video production is done in-house. And the purpose of the piece, again, was just to compel the public to participate and connect redistricting today to the struggle for voting rights, as well as informational PowerPoints and other toolkit items. So some of our challenges and opportunities. First, I'll just say our workshops and materials are currently in English only. We recognize this is a shortcoming. We are currently working to translate some materials to Spanish, but of course our resources are limited. So how can the CRC help? With additional resources, we would love to translate our redistricting video and other outreach materials to at least Spanish, if not multiple languages. At the very least, we encourage and frankly expect the Citizens Redistricting Commission to have materials, official materials, available in different languages, which we would then be able to use. Second, as a nonprofit, of course, we have limited staff resources, so unfortunately I cannot be watching the Commission's meeting all the time. I cannot attend every Commission meeting, but know that we are out there. And one thing that would help is if we were provided a daily summary of key decisions made by the Commission at the end of each day that the Commission meets. It's a lot easier than fumbling through the transcripts or, asking who was there and trying to figure out that pertinent information. And lastly, this is a real opportunity we feel that is a missed opportunity so far. One of our toolkit hot items is the video, so a lot of organizations are going to be using this in their outreach as well. And Kathy Fang actually has asked us from Common Cause, she's asked us to, if we can put together some other video tutorials, so maybe a short one on just communities of interest or a short one on how to prepare to testify. That would reach a much broader audience across California. We can post that via social media and other avenues. She's got a lot of great footage from the Redistricting California conference that we can use, so that's not an issue. It's really just the time and resources to put it together. And Greenlining can do that. It's really just a matter of resources. So how you can help. Provide resources to support the expansion video pieces, and we could work with the commission on that. Or, I would encourage you to think about video as a medium for outreach in your efforts. Otherwise, this is our contact information. Visit us online. You have my information there, and I don't know what my time is here, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you. One comment, and then we'll open it up for questions. We have begun at the lead of Rob Wilcox, our communications director. This week we started producing daily summaries of our meetings, and he has been blasting those out on email, and they've been on the Redistricting CA website, correct?
Yes, and if you're not already sign on our data.
I see that first one.
Okay.
And I didn't know if that would continue, but I think that that's a great idea.
Absolutely will continue.
Excellent. Commissioner Dye, and then Commissioner Baraba.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to refer that to Mr. Wilcox and ask him to comment. So we already talked about the daily summaries. Yesterday's one went out rather late because the meeting went rather late, but it did go out. But I wonder if you want to comment on the video and what we might be able to do.
I just think that the video that you did is terrific, and we had a great deal of conversation, the commission and our advisory committee, Public Information Advisory Committee, about the video outreach. And I think yesterday there was a long conversation about what the outreach efforts and educational efforts of the commission are going to be, and that a great deal of that will be trying to maximize and reach as many people as we can through videos, of course in several languages, and reaching out. So I appreciate that, and what you've already done is terrific.
Okay, I have quite a few commissioners in the stack. I'll start with Commissioner Baraba.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. It was very enlightening. In your target regions, I noticed you didn't have any activity up in the Monterey and Santa Cruz area. Is that because nobody's knocked on your door? Or?
No, actually, so we had to pick our regions strategically for our own purposes. But CAUSE is in that area, so there are organizations working in the Central Coast region, and so I would refer you to Chris Lanier, who will be presenting later, and they also have a multi-ethnic outreach effort.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Thank you very much for coming here today. What resources did your organization use to put together the community of interest handout that I presume you're going to be giving at your workshops?
So that was just, so Chris Lanier from CAUSE and I had to present a workshop at the statewide conference called Preparing to Testify. It was the first time we had to do that, and we needed material, so we just brainstormed some questions and what are all the possible community profiles that could happen, and put some of those resources together.
So you, in collaboration with Common Cause, put together this handout?
With CAUSE, the
with
Central
CAUSE.
Coast United for a Sustainable Economy.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anchetta.
Well, thank you. And, thank you. And this is your materials look great. You even announced my joining the commission probably earlier than the commission's website did, which is really good. This is a very. I think that I was curious about the communities of interest handout that you did, because it's particularly detailed, which I think is very helpful. Do you have? There's a lot of stuff here, obviously. Do you have sort of a reduced definition when you're doing the workshops in terms of how you want individuals to sort of think about communities of interest? And related to that, if there's any discussion regarding the term neighborhood, which is in the Act as well.
So to your first question, before we introduce communities of interest as a technical term, we usually just ask the community to describe their area or their city or county or their region, as if they were explaining it to someone from out of state who doesn't know about it. And so some of those characteristics are kind of inherent, and we know those things about our community, and so that's a good way to start the conversation. Outside of that, Proposition 20 has some language on how to define communities of interest, so we direct them to that as well. But understand that there hasn't been any precedent about communities of interest, so we tell them that it is very broad and to try and think about all those different things it could be. But we do know that Proposition 20 has a definition as well.
How about, do you try to have any discussion of what a neighborhood is?
And I haven't come across that yet, but that's something that I'll definitely have to think about. Yeah.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, thank you, Michelle, for joining us this morning. Regarding the ethnic media, and do you, I'm sure you have some list of ethnic media up and down the state, is that correct?
We have a media and communications director.
Yeah.
So we have a media team, and we use a software that I am not familiar with. But there are tools for that. And so yes, we have a lot of ethnic and local media relationships that we've built from contacts that we subscribe to.
Yeah, because we're embarking on an effort to really have commissioners go throughout the state to work with ethnic media editorial boards throughout. So I'm wondering whether the Green Line Institute might be willing to share that information with Rob Wilcox, our communications director, so that we can avail ourselves of those kind of contacts and penetration.
I'll take that interest back to our media team, and we'll get back to you.
And my last question is your organization going to be drawing maps to submit?
That's a great question. We do not plan to draw any statewide or district-specific maps for redistricting as an alternative map. What we really see ourselves doing is facilitating a process of empowering communities to just kind of speak on their own behalf on maybe a smaller piece of geography that they know really well, so their neighborhood, however they define that, or community, however they define that, as opposed to drawing complete districts or statewide proposal. We want to amplify the voice of the community.
Commissioner Raya, last question.
Thank you. Just a quick question. When you were describing your model briefing before the LA conference, it sounded like you perhaps had a list of FAQs, which is something that we've also worked on. Is that the case?
I can't hear you very well.
I'm sorry.
So the media briefing you're saying before the conference,
Yeah.
you had a list of what?
It sounded as though you were developing a list of frequently asked questions for the media. You said difference between redistricting, reapportioning, and I just wondered if you have sort of a list and if you would be able to share that with us.
I do have a list that we've used for our panels, and I'd be happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Great. Okay, next we're going to have Stephen Ochoa from the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Charlotte's going to load in his PowerPoint, and we'll jump right in.
Do we have copies of the next presentation? No? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Ochoa. I'm the National Redistricting Coordinator for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I am very, very glad to be here. I had the opportunity to meet many of you in Claremont a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to meet the rest of you now. So, before we go into, per the request from the CCP, let me tell you a little bit about MALDEF and what our plans for redistricting are this year. Broadly speaking, first, MALDEF is founded in 1968, is one of the largest Latino civil rights organizations in the nation. We have regional offices in Los Angeles, San Antonio, D.C., and Chicago. We have policy offices in Sacramento, with our headquarters being in Los Angeles, where I'm currently stationed. We have, throughout our history, we have been working on redistricting since our founding, so since the cycles in the 70s, participating in a variety of statewide and local redistrictings. But let me tell you a little bit about our program this cycle. So MALDEF nationally this year will be focusing on a 12-state redistricting plan. It's our most ambitious policy program ever regarding redistricting. Each of our 4 regional offices will get 3 of these assigned to 12 states. You see on the board. With the Western region being personally conducted by myself, which includes California. Important for you. All of our redistricting teams in our regional offices will contain coordinators, attorneys, and GIS analysts. Coordinators are tasked with actually conducting the outreach, educating the public, learning, and or collaborating with others involved in the processes. GIS assistants, self-explanatory. They deal with the mapping software. Of course, our attorneys keep us all kosher. And then a little bit about myself. So, as the national coordinator, I'll be supervising all of these teams across across the nation. And I personally, as Maria Blanco alluded to, participated in the MALDEF redistricting process in 2001 as the GIS analyst. That's important because when I start going into the recommendations later, it's the perspective of somebody who's actually gone through the process and crafted complete statewide plans. So what are we doing in California specifically? So part of our program involves going and conducting extensive community outreach. In California, we're going to be conducting dozens of meetings throughout the state, focusing in areas where the Latino community lives and grows, and where there might be opportunities for improvement in fair representation. Our traditional meeting lasts about 3 to 4 hours and contains 3 components. First, we teach the community what are the fundamentals of redistricting, or the statewide criteria, some local criteria overview. After we teach them the fundamentals, we actually put them through a redistricting exercise to drive home these fundamentals. Our exercise is paper-based, so we don't want people trying to learn both technology and the fundamentals at the same time. That's already a lot to go through, and it's a unique. Each exercise is unique to the area that we present in. So we give them something local, so not only can they focus on learning the fundamentals, but they can start applying the fundamentals to their neighborhoods or their small cities, and then they give us feedback as to what their communities of interest are at that point, which will be important later, because when we start drawing, we need information. And then finally, at the end of a traditional meeting, we teach people how to participate. We teach them, if we know the public testimony schedule, the public hearing schedule, tell them when these meetings are that the commission will be putting on. We teach them best practices. We teach them how to advocate for the communities of interest, and just basically how to participate in the process. Tentative locations, we're doing a series of meetings in LA County. We just completed our first one on Thursday in San Diego. Of course, we're going to be hitting San Bernardino, Riverside, Monterey, the Central Valley cities, San Jose, and Santa Ana. I should note that we are combining resources with the NALEO Educational Fund to maximize our coverage of the Latino community. That's our collaborative partner, at least in the direct outreach. But of course, we also collaborating with many other groups. We are in direct collaboration with the African American Redistricting Coalition, ARC, the Asian and Pacific American Legal Center, APALC, and the NALEO Educational Fund, as I mentioned, as well as talking consistently with many other groups who are at least participating in the process, many good government groups, many of the groups funded by the James Irvine Foundation, of which we are also. But after our outreach is completed, MALDEF will be submitting complete statewide plans for Assembly, Senate, and Congress, as we did in 2001. And of course, at the end of the process, after the votes are all said and done, the plans are all completed. If necessary, if we feel there are violations to the U.S. Constitution or Voting Rights Act, Federal Voting Rights Act, we will litigate if necessary. So, recommendations for success. So there's a series of MALDEF, ARC, APOC, now LEO previously submitted a letter with a series of general principles that we hope you follow as you craft your processes. I just want to quickly repeat them. As you make your decisions, aim for full compliance with the Voting Rights Act, respect processes that respect communities of interest, a transparent process, and create a process where there's considerable opportunities for public participation. So that said, examining the specific plan proposed by the CCP, we do have a series of recommendations. I'm going to quickly list through some of them. Some of my associates are going to go into detail about those. I specifically want to use the rest of my time after I list them, though, to talk about timeline and mapping issues. Very briefly, I concur with my colleagues on transparency improvements. The website, wedrawthelines.ca.gov, needs to be improved. I urge complete transparency in the staff hiring process. Don't forget you are analyzing, when you're completing your last hires, you're looking for relevant skills and ability to be impartial, not just bid quality. Regarding your education and public hearing meetings, I know you have this 9-region focus proposed, dividing the state up. I do want to just point out that there is a bit of population imbalance in these regions. Los Angeles County alone contains 27% of the state. If we would at least advocate a second meeting per round in the LA County region, else you might face situations where you have a lot more people trying to cram into one meeting. Just a suggestion. Just remember, MALDEF and others are doing, of course, outreach and education meetings, but as you're planning your meetings, just note, you can consider them, but they are not the same as yours. We have different focuses. Of course, we're going to urge participation, but just remember, it's okay if you go to the same areas that we do. And if you have language assistant components to your meetings, just remember to highly publicize it well in advance to the linguistically isolated. That will be a rather important process. But I specifically want to talk about the timeline. So in its recommendations, the CCP recommended that the Commission put out its first draft on May 24th. That is very, very early, and I need to, and both as a community advocate and a practical line drawer, I want to remind you. I know everyone is focused on community participation as only verbal and written testimony. That is very important, and you are light years ahead of the process that was 10 years ago. But another component of the participation process is actually having the opportunity to submit maps to you for your consideration, submit ideas to you. That is another mechanism to give you information. If you put your first draft early, you limit the ability of people who do want to participate in the process via that particular component method. You limit their ability to give you information. That directly impacts pretty much every group that is testifying to you today who are doing their own components of outreach and participation. If you go earlier, if you go earlier, there are going to be the unintended consequences of not as many people being able to participate submitting maps, and directly undermines our current work. Many of our groups are collaborating with others, and I just want to remind you that it takes time to craft even a single map. From my experience in 2001, internally, it took me about a month to draft a congressional plan. And that was internally, and then I had to go around talking with my partners, talking with my colleagues, and then new ideas came up. Then I had to redraw maps. It takes days to get your congressional plan plus or minus one person. You're going to need time for yourself, frankly. You're also going to need time, for logistically to pull off all the public hearing meetings that you have to do in conjunction with informing your map. A later date serves you also because your map quality will improve with a little more time. Think of the analogy I can think of is writing an essay. You know, the first draft, second draft, third draft, they usually progressively get better and better. If you produce a better quality first draft map, that'll improve the hearing process and the input of the community as they participate after you release it.
Mr.
But of
Ochoa, you
course,
have about 4 minutes.
all right, but of course, you know, what do I suggest instead? Just real quickly, and then I'll leave it for questions. So right now, CCP suggests first draft by the 24th. I suggest first you give groups a deadline of May 31st for them to submit maps, kind of as submit your maps by this date to kind of be the most effective, most efficient, most effective date. And then the commission itself releases its draft on the June 10th. Gives you a few more weeks, gives you much more information, detailed information in all likelihood, that could inform your plans. It'll help you, if you have more information, it kind of help you identify potential landmine, so to speak. You know, if you might be missing components, you might be struggling with a certain area. Others could come up with different ideas that could inspire or you can take. So then just very quickly, you know, you would just modify. Of course, you still have to maintain the public hearing process afterwards. You know, you'd probably have a series of hearings between June and July 15th. July 15th, I would recommend a second draft and a close to final draft. Squeeze in a few meetings for like final changes, and then by August 1st, that's when you should release your final draft. That was a lot.
Thank you. Commissioner Baraba.
Sure. Thank you very much. That was very informative. Several people have suggested that we should put a map out so that people will have something to react to, and it's been a discussion within the commission. One of the thoughts is to make sure that it doesn't look like this is the map and discourages people from coming up with their own, was to come up with maybe 2 examples of what the maps could be. Would that in any way hinder? Because I think you raised an important point about turning off people.
So if you release an earlier map, you're basically releasing a less quality map. Again, you're a second draft as opposed to a third draft of an essay. If you release a more informed product, I think ultimately it will actually help give you more positive feedback when people are testifying to the process.
Yeah. So the point that several people have made is that it would be a more informative input meeting if there was something to react to. You're suggesting that might not be the case.
You would get angry testimony rather than actually. I am working in the community. I'm a community advocate. I've been hearing about different communities of interest. I'm going to be hearing, and I'm going to be putting that information in my plan. That's information I would submit to you and give you to help you inform your decisions. It would help you smooth out. Once a public map is out, then it's just arguing about the fringes. And some substantive changes, if you do make them, would require even more hearings after that. Make the substantive changes before you release your first plan, and then it will help you out, is my opinion. It will also give your team more time to get it right.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Thank you very much for your time. And I do recall meeting you in Claremont, so thanks for coming up here. I have a few questions. I have 3 questions in particular. I recognize what you had said, that your focus, I think it was on one of your earlier slides for your organization, is to focus on Latino opportunity for elected candidates of choice statewide. You said you're holding what is the number of meetings that you're scheduled for your organization that you are categorizing as outreach?
At this point, I would say I have approximately 13, 14. That could change.
And that 13, 14 is what your organization anticipates?
In partnership with NALEO, yes.
Okay. And are there any other And those are meetings that your organization is holding as your own outreach to assist you in what you intend on drafting as maps to present to this commission.
Right. So they serve the dual purpose of educating the community about the redistricting process, as well as an opportunity for me, a map drafter, to get direct information to know what are the communities of interest in those areas.
And you said that your outreach has a different focus. What is the focus of MALDEF's outreach efforts?
Well, the focus is education and focusing on communities that have been traditionally disenfranchised, traditionally have disproportionate representation in different levels of government. Yes, this, we're talking, you're statewide, but we are also offering assistance in local redistrictings.
So what, as far as your focus being with traditionally disenfranchised voters, what would be your assessment of the types of map that you would be providing? Does it, in other words, given that you said your focus is Latino opportunity, I just want to know, since we have an opportunity here, that when we see your maps, are you proposing maps where the focus would be Latino opportunity, or is it more balanced? I'd just like to know what this commission should expect from your maps that you intend on submitting.
The goal of our maps, our plans, is compliance with the U.S. Constitution, compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act, and then respecting communities of interest. If you do that properly, communities all across the state, Latino included, will have improved quality of representation.
Thank you. Our questions are going to be offered by Commissioner Anchetta, Commissioner Ward, Commissioner DiGiulio, Commissioner Aguirre, and I think that will take us to the end of your time. Commissioner Anchetta.
Thank you. And I may sound like a broken record, so maybe I should alert the later presenters. I'm going to ask about neighborhood and communities of interest a lot. So, or I'd like to have folks kind of talk about how they're helping with outreach and how if they're giving sort of shape to those terms. But neighborhood communities of interest, and then particularly for MALDEF, to the extent you're doing any kind of outreach, not to the public necessarily, but to other folks who might have insights into, say, polarized voting and other things that, again, are non-census related. And then with relation to communities of interest, how you are looking, if at all, at ethnic and language criteria or factors to help define communities of interest.
So the way I discuss communities of interest when I give my lesson plan, so to speak, is I tell everyone that communities of interest, a community of interest is a community or neighborhood that best benefits by being kept whole. But absent that basically informal definition, there really is no legal standard to a community of interest. So I tell people a COI is defined, frankly, by you, the local, and it has to, the local up has to tell both myself, both you, the commission, what their communities of interest are, and that they need to come up with two components to defining a community of interest, what I call the qualitative and the quantitative. The quantitative, like demographics, census issue data, things they can easily add up and find. But the qualitative is basically the testimony, the history, stories that, you know, really you can't put into a database. You know, what are the commonalities? You know, to come up with as many commonalities, both quantitative and qualitative, as possible. So language isolation could be one of them. Incomes, one of them. Church-going habits. They all go to the same community event. Whatever they can think of, whatever their story is, to come up with it, and then quickly put, even if it's just a Thomas Guide or AAA map around their neighborhood, if it's an urban area, or if it's a small city, it's a small city. So at least you give it to map drawers, both yourselves and myself, so people have reference points to know what they're talking about, and get as many people to tell the same story as you can.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward?
Good morning, Stephen. Thanks for your testimony and your MALDEF service. Commissioner Baraba actually asked kind of the same question I was wondering, and I just wanted to clarify that the way the Commission was kind of leaning per other expert testimony was that releasing draft maps earlier will actually increase participation, and obviously that's our goal. And I understood from your expertise and opinion pushing that back is better because moving it forward, per your words, would limit input. And I was just wondering if you could expand on how having a release date as we had previously proposed would actually limit input.
So that's in reference to So there's two ways to participate in the redistricting process for the public. There's written and verbal testimony at various stages, but also submitting maps. And if you go earlier, basically you make the window smaller for that participation window. The public at large will be most influential if they give you information while you're drawing your first draft or before you release your first map. That is when it's most effective. And while you will certainly be going around the state and listening to many people as possible, community advocates like myself and like many people testifying today are also doing the same thing, often reaching out to the harder to reach communities that may traditionally go to a state government function, a public hearing. And so we have additional information to give you. And we are also collaborating on our own as well. And, trying to get, so for example, we're working with the African American and Asian American communities to at least try to come up with unity ideas, if maybe not a map, but at least ideas, so we're not stepping on each other's toes. So you want as informed information and testimony before you draw or while you're drawing. The other reason I also say this, so in that regard, it limits public participation. So you're going the extreme of what happened in 2001. In 2001, the legislature waited to the last minute. You're going earlier, but the unintended consequences, then you're cutting the legs out of people who have been working in the communities for years to get you information before you draw so you can make as an informed draft as possible. Just delaying even a few weeks will give you breathing room, and it will help the quality of your first drafts as well.
In the interest of time, I'll ask Commissioners DiGiulio and Aguirre to be brief.
I will be very brief. And this it does revolve around this issue of discussion of time. I think we've been reviewing this, and one of the issues, I think it's important for all of our partnering organizations or those that are working on this issue is to realize if in an ideal world we would like to have as much time, but we're really pushed. And one of the points is if you're going to be out talking to your to individuals is to clarify, I think for what I understand for the submittal of our maps, it's my understanding, isn't it by legislation or by the proposal we have to give 2 weeks notice whenever we submit our map. So when we submit if we submit our map on August 1st, we will not be allowed to make any revisions. So just so you know, we've been backing up our timeline to incorporate as much public input for that final map. So when you're talking to your constituents, I hope it's very important, and for all groups to know, we'd love to get as much input, but we really need to consider the time. That's partly why we're backing it up.
Right, and this is why I suggest these alternate dates for a second draft and a final draft.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, just a quick question related to your experience as map drawer. What types of information and what types of formats are you recommending in your training for submittal of information to the Commission? I understand maps, but beyond that.
Unless the community is talking about a voting rights district possibility, I tell everyone to focus on their communities of interest. So I tell them to define themselves, and as they're defining themselves, also make sure to tell you and myself what other neighboring communities they best relate to. So when they come in so the worst thing that can happen to them is a line going straight through their neighborhood. We at least want to minimize that. Then after that, we want to put them with the neighborhoods that they best relate to after they keep themselves whole. So then I say, come to you, at least with just even if it's just a AAA map, Thomas Guy, draw what they think their neighborhood boundary is, so when they give it to someone like me, a technical person, I at least know what they're talking about. I know in the past, 10 years ago, communities were described to me verbally, generally bound by this freeway and somewhere around that street. And I would draw that street, and then later I would get accused of cutting a community of interest because, someone else would say, the boundary is really 3 streets more or closer or farther. So
maps and descriptive written information.
Maps, descriptive information, and for the community to come in en masse and as uniform a message as possible. That would make the most impact to you, to me.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa, for your time. I do have a point of clarification before we go to the next presenter. I'm on the Redistricting CA website, and I am trying to locate where the presentations that are already online, where exactly they're located.
Assuming they're up, they would be under, I think it's the second tab called News.
News and Community?
Yeah, exactly. see what you see. Also, I know once they ask it to go up, it takes a little time to be up.
Okay. Thank you. So for members of the public, presentations, if they are not already up, will be posted to redistrictingca.org under the News and Community tab of the website. At this time, we'd like to welcome Mr. Eugene Lee from the Asian Pacific American Legal Center. I do see presentations up online from at least a handful of today's presenters.
Yeah. It's not successfully installed. Help! It's not loading up.
And I'm actually going to make a process suggestion. After Mr. Lee and Ms. Schaefer, we will go on break for 15 minutes. I'd like to request that CCP upload all the presentations between that break and lunch, and then over lunch, if you can upload all the ones for the afternoon, if the presenters are here. Thank you.
I could just press one of these buttons.
Yeah.
Right? Great.
If you want to walk around.
Okay. How close do I? Is this okay here? Yeah. Honorable Commissioners and Commission staff, greetings. I'm Eugene Lee, and I work at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, where I am the Voting Rights Project Director. And I wanted to thank you for holding this hearing, and also a thank you to CCP for helping facilitate this. Let me talk. Sorry. Can I? Okay. Okay, there we go. I thought I would start with an overview of my organization. We were founded in 1983. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit civil rights and legal services organization doing work in a variety of areas, providing support to the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in Southern California. And as part of our work, we've worked with statewide coalitions. And I'm going to talk about the statewide coalition that we're working with currently. In terms of how we're staffing our redistricting work, we have a team of 4 individuals, which includes 2 attorneys, including myself, and 2 demographers. APOC provides anchoring support to a statewide network called CAPIFER. It's a little bit of a jaw-breaking acronym, but it stands for the Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans for Fair Redistricting, which was founded initially during the 1990 redistricting, and in 2001 submitted the first statewide assembly proposal on behalf of the API community. CAPIFER is structured as a network of 10 regional coalitions with outreach and education done on a local level, but with these efforts coordinated on a statewide basis. We have a couple of goals. One goal is community empowerment, so we want to work with community members, educate them about redistricting, help them to understand why it's important, and help them to testify at the Commission's hearings. As part of our outreach, we've targeted community leaders and activists within the Asian American community. Our second goal is fair representation, and what we mean by this is to try to get new district lines that keep API communities together rather than split them apart. And one of our tools for this is to submit a statewide assembly proposal as well as a statewide state senate proposal. What's not on the slide, and what I hope is obvious, is that a very broad goal is to help the Commission make informed decisions about the API community. So we think we're in this together with the Commission, and our hope is to be able to have a good partnership going forward this year. So I mentioned that CalPrefer is a statewide coalition, and we're planning on submitting statewide mapping proposals. That said, we do have specific areas of focus that we're doing local outreach and education, and I've listed these areas here corresponding to 10 regional coalitions, so 5 coalitions in the northern half of the state and 5 coalitions in the southern half of the state. We've selected these regions based on our work in the past, particularly in the 2001 redistricting process. The counties that these coalitions are located in are home to approximately 80% of the Asian American and Pacific Islander population in the state. I wanted to give an overview of the work that we've been doing to date and also going forward. We have our work structured around 4 series of community meetings. We started our first round of meetings in July and August 2010, and this was basically a round of introductory meetings and educational meetings. We conducted outreach to try to bring folks together within each of the regional coalitions to come to these meetings where we provided education to community members. Our second round of meetings was in September through November, where we were collecting input. So our focus shifted a little bit into input gathering mode rather than educational mode. And we collected input on the interest and needs that local API communities saw as very important. And after meeting 2 and between meeting 3, which we have just finished, we did some research in-house at APAL collecting data. We've looked at census data, but also are looking at non-census data to try to identify where do these interests and needs, how do they lay out geographically, and how can we use that information to try to construct districts that keep these communities as outlined by these data together. And so we'll be presenting that data later on this year. So I mentioned we've just finished our third round of meetings, which is to go back to community members, present them with potential district configurations, and get their input on how those potential configurations correspond with the prior input that they provided us, basically asking them to tell us, do these things make sense? Our last round of meetings we'll be conducting in April and May this year, looking at proposed district lines, and then after meeting 4, we'll submit statewide proposals to the Commission. In total, this is 40 meetings across the state, so it's actually quite a bit of travel, and we can commiserate with the Commission's responsibilities in traveling across the state. I wanted to note that kind of all along from meeting 1 to our meeting 3, we've been doing outreach as part of the journey. So we've had new members come into meeting 2 and 3, and as part of meeting 2 and 3, we do some educational, we do provide some education as part of those meetings. It's not just the input phase during meeting 2 and 3. I wanted to talk a little bit about the principles that APALC and CalPrefer are working under. As my colleague Stephen Ochoa mentioned, a number of groups are looking at the Voting Rights Act as a top priority for our work, and we hope that the Commission will also as well. And that means that prioritizing VRA-compliant districts, even with respect to other communities. So, one of the tough challenges in our meetings is telling API community members, hey, look, there may be a Latino VRA district in this area or an African-American VRA district in that area, and that may constrain what we can do here. And while it's a constraint, it's something we need to and we should want to take into account. Our second principle is communities of interest. And I just want to note there, we do look at a variety of factors, including race, but not limited to race and ethnicity, as part of the various things that can define communities of interest. So we do look at race, but not as the only factor, but instead as one of several factors. One comment on neighborhoods. We're looking at this and we're struggling with this because this is new for California. And I guess we would just invite the Commission to try to come up with some sort of guidance for community groups, and we're happy to provide input on that. I don't have time to do that right now, but we'd be happy to talk to the Commission about what could go into a definition of neighborhoods at a later point. And then the third principle is working with other stakeholders. So as you'll hear from others today, community groups are committed to working with each other, trying to find common ground. And so we've worked with colleagues at the NALEO Educational Fund, MALDEF, the African American Redistricting Collaborative, Greenlining, Advancement Project, and other groups. So I've kind of talked about what CAPRFR is and our activities. I wanted to spend a few minutes, if I could, on some recommendations for the Commission. One is on language assistance. So we do think that the Commission should increase publicity of language assistance. Respectfully, it's not enough to put something in English only on page 6 at the bottom of the agenda saying that language assistance is available. We do think that what would be very helpful is to have an in-language statement, a translated statement on the website very prominently indicating that language assistance is available. Otherwise, you're not going to get any requests for language assistance. Another recommendation is to increase awareness about the efforts of community-based organizations. As you know, a number of groups are doing educational work in their own capacities. This work shouldn't be a substitute for the Commission's own educational efforts, but at the same time, we do think that there will be community members going to the Commission's workshops who are excited, but probably need a place to plug into. And they need to plug into an organized effort to really make their efforts effective. And so we think it'd be really helpful if the Commission could set up web pages listing nonprofits as well as other groups, and we think there should be separate web pages listing nonprofits and other groups that community members can go to and plug into if they so choose. The Bureau of State Audits did that in 2009 and in 2010 during the Commission selection process. And we think that it would be great if the Commission could think about a similar type of structure.
Mr. Lee, you have about 5 minutes left for your presentation.
Thank you. We have a couple of recommendations about the timeline for the timeline of mapping and hearings. I just wanted to echo my colleague Stephen Ochoa's comment that maps are a critical part of community input. A lot of communities of interest testimony that you will receive and a lot of input you'll receive from individuals will be around what I would call micro units, how to keep a small defined area together, or what that small defined area actually is. But maps add value because they provide an opinion about how these different micro units should be kept together or paired. You know, one of these micro units can't make up a district by itself, so there needs to be other areas added in, and these maps provide very good insights on how the Commission could do that. And so I would ask the Commission to think about maps as a very valuable component of community input, and because of that, to give the community more time to submit maps prior to the Commission releasing its own draft map. And we think the Commission should release a draft map in June rather than May. Just, you know, not to belabor the point, but once the Commission releases a draft map, it's kind of headed down a certain path. And if it later receives input it hadn't considered, but that would have made a difference in the Commission's draft map, it could be too late to really consider that subsequent input. So we think it's better to get all the input in the door at the outset before the release of the draft map. Another point is that we do think commissioners should, that as many commissioners should attend the hearings as possible. I know that Karen McDonald had made a similar point in one of the previous Commission meetings, and I would just echo that. As many commissioners should attend these hearings as possible. There's nothing like hearing the input in person. I know that my colleague Stephen Ochoa talked about this already. Regional balance in hearings, just to echo the comment that LA has 1/4 of the state's population, and people are going to get shortchanged if they only get 5 minutes to speak, whereas people in other regions get 15 minutes to speak. So we think there should be at least a second hearing in Los Angeles. With respect to San Jose, it's the 3rd largest city in California. And I'm looking at the current CCP configuration. It looks like it's that Santa Clara is lumped together with Santa Cruz and Monterey, which is fine. And it probably is appropriate for hearing locations to be in Salinas or Watsonville within that region. But we think that San Jose should be a second hearing location within that region. given that it is the third largest city in California. My last slide is on staffing recommendations. I've said this before. I think that the Voting Rights Act Council is one of the most important, or whom to hire for Voting Rights Act Council is one of the most important decisions. So we think the Commission should hire one attorney, not two, and specifically one who's going to gain the trust of California's diverse communities, someone who has experience vindicating VRA claims, is someone who's going to gain the trust of California's very diverse communities. And then lastly, we think there should be increased transparency in the consultant. I know there are website issues, but we do think that the RFIs for the mapping consultant and the VRA position should be posted as soon as possible. And that with respect to the mapping consultant RFI, I don't have it, so I don't know exactly what was taken out, but I know that the scoring system was taken out to some extent, and I guess that just gives me pause for concern as to whether applicants are going to be properly evaluated for qualifications and impartiality. And so I would urge the Commission to think about that for the mapping consultant and not just look at price.
Thank you. Commissioners have the floor. I'm going to take the liberty of putting myself in the stack. I have a quick clarification on your last slide. You put in the slide, hire one attorney, not two. Can you elaborate a little more on the not two part of that?
Sure. Well, I know there's been discussion about hiring two attorneys, and I think practically speaking that is going to be very difficult to work out. The Commission needs to move quickly, and if you have two attorneys with potentially different perspectives, it's going to take time for them to hash it out, and that could delay the process. I would also cite budget impact for hiring two attorneys, so that's the rationale for recommending just one attorney.
I'd like to just clarify who's in the stack. I have Filkins, Weber, Anchetta, Dye, Blanco, and Forbes, and Ontai. Excellent. Filkins, Weber.
Thank you very much for coming. On page 5 of your slides, you have the regional coalitions, and if I understood you correctly, those are the areas where you're planning your 40 meetings?
That is correct.
Okay. And you had also said that that the identification of these areas was based on your efforts in 2001.
In addition to, yes, and in addition to that, looking at the population sizes within those areas. So
okay. And so as I understand it, then, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, obviously there's no indication for the Inland Empire, Riverside County, or San Bernardino County, and I understand that there may be consideration there given the less population of your focus, but did you give consideration to the many population projections that Riverside County in particular might be one of the largest and fastest growing population areas in the state of California in the last 10 years?
That's a great point, and if we had additional capacity, I think we would be there. Another factor in our hesitation to be active there is that we did not find a well-established community group to partner with in that region, whereas these other regions, there are very well-established Asian American community groups that we could partner with.
Thank you. Commissioner Anchetta.
Well, thank you. This is very helpful. As you're very well aware, the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities are enormously diverse, whether it's ethnicity, language, immigration status, generation, homeland affiliation, regions, et cetera. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing, to the extent you've been working on communities of interest quite a bit, some of the, if there are any variations or even tensions, if you want to share those things. But it seems to me there are a wide variety of communities and who may self-identify along different dimensions, mm-hmm. and whether that has posed in your outreach efforts some challenges.
Right. Well, that's a great question, and it's probably 3 months of conversation. And something we struggle with in our work all the time in other areas of our work. I think the key is to try to find where there are common needs and common interests, and there are many of those. For example, in most of the regions that we've done work in, community members have cited language access and language barriers as a common need that cuts across various Asian American Pacific Islander ethnic groups, and so that's something we've looked at and plan on using as part of communities of interest arguments in several of the regions we're active in. So I guess I would answer just very shortly that it's about finding common interests that can be acted upon in Sacramento.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dye.
Really. Kind of as a follow-up to Commissioner Ncheda's question, among the AAPI communities, there's also generational differences, differences in level of assimilation into the broader community. I wonder if you can comment a little bit on that.
Well, that's another conversation that could take 3 or 4 months. What we've tried to do in our outreach meetings is to get a broad range of experiences and backgrounds, including age, so that we hear different perspectives from community members. It's a challenge to bring that out. There are dynamics where younger individuals may feel reluctant to speak if there are older individuals in the room who are perceived as the leaders. So it's a challenge, but I guess what I would say is it's something we're certainly cognizant of and trying to address as best as possible, and something we'll be talking to you about further when we present the data that we've collected and our mapping proposals.
Commissioner Blanco.
Good morning. You mentioned that you just finished already the 3rd round where you've gone out to communities.
Yes.
And based on earlier rounds where they gave you community of interest input, you've now gone back with some proposed scenarios that capture what they had given to you.
That is correct.
Correct? So when you do that, as you've been doing this 3rd round, do you just take them, the proposed scenario for their area, or is it something that now it takes into account everything you've gotten from your 10 regions, and you're already trying to accommodate where things are going to line up with other areas and with the Voting Rights Act, or are you just going back to them about, does this capture your community of interest?
It's not going to them with a proposed scenario on a statewide basis. We've not had time to do that, so it's what you said at the very beginning, going to each region with proposed scenarios for that particular region. And what we do is we give them 2 or 3 configurations and say, what do you think makes sense for your community here? But it's just for that particular region. The hard work now, when March begins, will be to integrate all that into a statewide context.
I'll ask Commissioner Forbes and Commissioner Ontai to be brief in the interest of time.
Always. Just an opening comment. I think that the comments about perhaps an additional meeting in Los Angeles County and moving one of the meetings to San Jose, I think have merit, and the staff should consider those. Are you going to draw any congressional maps?
We don't have plans to do so primarily because of capacity reasons, but we do plan on talking to other stakeholders and trying to see if communities of interest could be incorporated into other congressional maps that may be proposed.
Okay. The second question is, what level of participation have you had at these public outreach meetings?
It's varied by region. Some regions, in some regions it's been a challenge to get people to come out and get engaged. So in some meetings we've had less than 10 people. Other meetings we've had as many as 30 people. So it's been a range.
Can you tell me what's been the worst, what's been the best?
I think the worst was probably 6 people, and the best was
No, where?
30.
Location?
So, what's that?
What location?
We've had some difficulties in our Fresno County Coalition engaging the community there, and so that's something we're working on.
Thank you.
Our last question, Commissioner Ontai.
Thank you so much for all the good work that you guys do. Let me ask you, in your organization's community of interest outreach to Pacific Islander groups, how do you guys do that? Give me some idea, how do you reach out to Hawaiian Samoans?
Well, I didn't go into this in detail, but for each regional coalition, we have a lead partner organization that is well-connected and well-established. So, for example, in Los Angeles County, we have a partner organization called APCON, which is actually a network of 30 to 40 Asian American and Pacific Islander organizations. So APCON is well-positioned within LA County to reach out to Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander specific organizations and bring them to the table and engage them. So, we work with and rely upon the expertise and connections of our local lead partners to engage Pacific Islander communities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lee. At this time, we're going to rearrange the schedule slightly. We're going to take a approximately 15-minute break, which will allow CCP the opportunity to upload the remaining presentations that will take us through the lunch recess. So we will reconvene at about 10:45 in this same room. Thank you.